We have a philosophy, and that's mortgage lending made easy.
We list it, and then we're in it together, like a marriage until it closes.
Hello everyone, and welcome. My name is David Shepard, and I am the president of Cheney Mortgage.
I am Claire Miller Birdie. I am broker and owner of Ann Miller Real Estate.
And this show we're bringing to you is to give you more information about real estate and mortgages and how it relates to you. And so with that, we've been doing what I've been doing mortgages now since 1998. And it's been quite a ride, to say the least.
Yes.
Things have changed considerably. I remember when I first even learned about what a mortgage was. I was fresh out of the Marine Corps and started to work for AmeriQuest, of all places. Back, when I first began, it was a tool that people would use as to help to finance or control their finances. They would consolidate debts. They would pay the majority of the monies towards their mortgage and use their house as an asset to leverage a lot of the expenses that came up, whether it be paying for college, consolidate debts, like as I said, or just to have a investment in real estate. And I mean, you've come across how many people?
Well, I have to tell you, which is funny, is when I started real estate in the 1985, as a realtor, we used to have to pre-qualify the buyers.
Really?
So we didn't need you then.
Wow.
We just needed you to actually do the mortgage.
Okay.
And the appraisal. So we had to pre-qualify before we took them out. There was no pre-qual letter. So it's interesting how it's evolved. So now we have to work so closely together. So that's, that's so important, because I won't go out with anybody unless they have a pre-qual letter.
Well, no, especially now when people are just calling up and dreaming, and the ease of the internet, people could look through properties.
Or even get pre-qualified online.
Sure.
Which never seems to work out, ever.
It's getting better and better, the whole electronic technology of how to go through the mortgage process. But it's true, there are questions that can be missed. There are things that can be missed if you're doing it by yourself online and not going through someone who has the experience to ask the questions that are pertinent to your ability to buy a home.
Right.
So when you get a letter from, like you said, offline, it's funny to see how that works. They have the advent of their cell phones, and the ease of the internet really helps people see more than they've ever seen. And as a result, and the reason I'm assuming why realtors don't take people out without a pre-qualification letter is because maybe they're looking at a home in an area that's more expensive than one that's maybe 3 miles from another home, and the taxes are so drastically different.
I think it just goes, it's simple as somebody's credit. What if somebody just can't get a mortgage?
Sure.
It's just that simple. So I'm not going to take somebody out that hasn't gone through that process.
Okay, yeah, absolutely right. And maybe they've not been on the job long enough,
So I think that's where it comes that you just want to make sure that those questions are asked. Like when we go back to the online, if those questions weren't asked, like what, proof of what you made, what your debt is, but somebody said all of a sudden you're approved for $500,000.
Sure.
How can that be true?
Well, even go back to even further when you actually said you began in the 80s. How much of an impact was the Social Security number?
I was 12. Yes.
But how much of an impact was the Social Security and the Social Security number in your credit history then as it is now? It's not the same. It's a drastically different environment. Credit once upon a time used to be a process where you would come in, you would interview, the person who was looking to extend credit would then call your references, call your job, talk to people you knew, talk to your family members, and then make a decision based on your character, along with your credit history and with your income and so forth. And by credit history, I mean with your local hardware store that you would go in, or your grocery store, you would go in and maybe
Yes.
have a tab and you would pay it off.
Do you remember did you ever hear the stories where buyers used to write the letters to the seller?
No.
So
I
in the
don't.
80s, buyers used to write the letter to the seller, how wonderful their house is, I can see me raising my family. You don't do that now.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no.
Strict commodity.
Yes.
A lot of the emotion's been stripped away.
So let's talk about, Cheney Mortgage,
Yes.
it's been around 2 years.
Yeah, sure.
And the reasoning for opening Cheney Mortgage?
Well, it was the realization that in the segmentation that you're to which you're referring about, once upon a time was one way and now it's different. It's hyper regulated to the point where everyone has a role in the process, and oftentimes within an organization, there is a that's not my job mentality. And when that happens, it causes delays and friction and all sorts of errors and poor outcomes that could come as a result. The reason why Cheney Mortgage is now here is we realize that much of that has to do with just open lines of communication. And being able to have open lines of communication, it changes. It changes your ability to get things done. And now we're here and we're closing loans on average from application to closing in 3 weeks. Whereas where I was coming from was 60 days.
Yeah, that's crazy,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And we still get calls from realtors asking, do we need 45 days? Do we need 60 days? Well, again, that's, you want to do a 45-day, we don't need that time. Does your buyer have a house to sell? I mean, is there a Hubbard clause? What's involved here? Give me more information and I'll tell you what we need.
So not anybody can be a mortgage officer.
No, well, once upon a time, anybody could be.
It's more difficult now.
It is difficult. I mean, the barrier to entry has to do much with information, education, and going through schooling and then ultimately a licensing exam. And a good majority of people who go through school and actually get through the school, forget about the people who don't make it through school, the people who actually make it through schooling and pass the school to get to the test, I've heard numbers as high as 40% failure rate. If you fail the first time, you got to wait 30 days. You fail the second time, you got to wait 30 days. You fail a third time, you have to wait 6 months. You have to have a very specific understanding of the mortgage process to be able to become a mortgage loan officer, a licensed mortgage loan officer. And currently, at the moment, it's not the case inside of federal institutions. So if you're looking at a depository, which is a federally chartered bank, those individuals do not need to be licensed. They need to be registered. So basically anybody can, provided they pass the interview with the person who is the hiring manager within the bank, can become a mortgage loan officer in a bank. But for a non-depository, for a mortgage lender, a mortgage corresponding lender, or even a mortgage broker, you must go through the licensing exam, the national exam and the state's exams, to be able to be acting as a mortgage loan officer.
So that was that big rush that happened several years ago, where all the loan officers that were working for mortgage companies had to go in and test. Is that what happened? And then some of them that didn't pass.
Well, there was that too. I mean, there was a stark difference in the number of mortgage loan originators that were then versus where they are now.
Yes.
Many people fell off. Many companies closed down. Once upon a time, in the mid 2000s, someone who's working in the mortgage business would want to get more people on their team because houses were going so fast that they would go through the drive-in at Dunkin' Donuts and say, "Have you ever thought about making $100,000? Come work and sell mortgages."
We used to have them in Miller Real Estate, like a revolving door.
Sure.
They used
And
to
how
just-
was that experience?
Yeah, crazy. With the rate sheets
Sure.
that nobody does.
No one cared about them then.
No.
They don't care about them now.
No.
There's regulations in place that basically protect everyone from gouging, and if you want to be in the business, you have to be competitive.
Well, it's the realtor will always tell you, the biggest complaint about a loan officer is that they don't return a phone call.
True. Very true. You know, that's part of it. You have to be available for public access.
This should be.
There's no wires.
Yeah, it should be implanted in your hand.
There's no wires.
It should be like
Attached.
yes,
Glued.
So a text, an email, a phone call. Oh, I don't understand the excuse for that.
Mm-hmm.
So it should always be. I remember when my mother was selling property, she would have 3 loan officers that she would use,
Mm-hmm.
and she would call them, and whoever called back
Mm-hmm.
got that deal.
Really?
It would be amazing how certain people just never called back.
Sure.
So that's the biggest complaint.
Mm-hmm.
Or even a text.
Mm-hmm.
Just text. And normally, most of the time, back then, the buyer was sitting in the office.
Sure. Yeah.
That's given money. Why
Well,
wouldn't you
going
do
back
that?
to the point where people don't answer the phones, and in the mortgage business, just like in the real estate business, it's about being available for someone when they need answers. You know, and many people still work 9-to-5 jobs. They get up in the morning, they go to work, they come home, and at their time, when they have availability, that's when they can look for a home.
Correct.
That's when they can go and ask, hey, I would like to look at this home, but they're saying I need to get a pre-qualification letter, or I need to go through a pre-approval process. Who do I call? Well, you can't go to the bank. Well, they're closed.
Right.
You know, you need a mortgage loan officer, a mortgage lender. It's going to be available to you, when you're available.
And then what happens if they don't get somebody?
Well, they keep dialing.
Or they move on to the next one.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
They keep
yeah.
dialing.
Because they want to get a
Hey,
live
Google.
body. Yeah. Next.
Someone who's awake.
Next.
Right.
And they'll find somebody
Sure.
who's eager to do that.
And I think that's why a lot of times you'll find that people will go online to get pre-qualified because they are looking for the convenience to be able to work at their life's speed, not your speed. You know, they have a process and things they must do. So to have the information at the time when they need it, maybe they feel like they're bothering someone. Maybe that's why you'll have these online apps that you can go through and try to get
Well, I
pre-qualified
think people
for.
like to do that because they can do it on their own time at 11 o'clock at night. They're going through looking at homes.
In the middle of their snacks.
Yes. But, and they're not bothering anybody. But getting back to bothering people, so what is this that's coming back? I don't know if you've been hearing this, but I've been hearing this when I've been calling people. Sorry, I can't get to the phone. I'm going to be returning phone calls between 3 and 4 today. So I have to wait for you to return my phone call between 3 and 4? Just don't answer your phone at all then.
Right.
That's crazy. Because when somebody's calling you, maybe 3 and 4 is not fine.
Well, that's why at where we are at Cheney, we not only have people who are going to be able to answer the phone,
A live person.
answer the phone, but also a lot of the people we have answering the phones can provide answers.
Yes.
In a regulated environment, you need to have your bases covered, and you need to be able to provide service when it's requested. And that challenge has to be met through a philosophy of making things easier. And that's why at Cheney Mortgage, our motto is mortgage lending made easy, because we try to make ourselves available, we try to make ourselves accountable, and we are always looking to make sure that things are done in a timely manner. So as to not upset the real estate agent, as to not upset most importantly, the client, or the seller, or the attorneys, or the inspectors, the appraisers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what goes on, we know our job well enough to be able to make sure that things are done in a timely manner. And I think that, to your point of having to call someone back or wait for someone to call you back, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because there are things that need to be done within the mortgage process. But at the same time, you still want to have that connection. You want to be able to speak to that person when you want to speak to that person. So availability and being consumer focused, I think, are paramount in separating a company from another.
Absolutely.
And that human touch. And if you go back to the whole online application thing, it's convenient, But you know what? You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what questions that need to be answered. You don't know what questions that haven't been asked. You don't have a person to listen to your scenario and give you advice on what to do next. You know,
Right.
through the credit process, the evaluation process, the whole qualification process, having someone who has intimate knowledge of what to do in that mortgage process, it's invaluable. So whilst a very small number of people can actually go through that online and be done instantly, and it's convenient for them, the vast majority of individuals have their individual story. We're not cookie cutter, we're not all the same. We all have our own situations, different number of children, different number of expenses, the list goes on, and how each person's different, and how we must look at those individuals as individuals looking to buy a home. And there's merit in that, and there's a service there, and like you said, you must answer the phone. Must. You know, that's the premise of the show, I think.
Yes.
And really the premise of the show is just starting to understand, you know, what goes on when you're buying and selling real estate, whether it be commercial real estate, your personal home, a 2-family, 3-family, apartment building, you know, a strip mall, you know, all of the things that have come in, you know, across as what you can and can't do. A convention center, who knows what could happen?
And I think that how complicated it is behind the scenes, that you make it seem so easy to the purchaser.
Sure. Well, and I think what we're going to do is shed a lot of light on that process, and give some people some pointers, tips, tricks on how to get involved, how to be part of real estate. You know, we have people all over talking about, and we've got new programs specifically for.
And I think if you
Fix and
know,
flipping.
then it's not so scary.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it really does.
Yeah.
Then you're just not going through it blindly.
If you've got good people, it really is a lot of fun.
Yes,
You know
absolutely.
what they say, buy real estate. It's the only thing they're not making more of, right?
Right, absolutely.
Anyways, well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We are looking forward to seeing you again